All right, the very cold, especially for the time of year, weather that we're having right now is prompting something that burns and festers inside of me because I feel like I know it. I've intuitively and through various historical evidence and all that, but also just like thinking about things. That's my way. I don't have all day to research things, and I don't think humans have all of their lifetime to devote to scientific studies. For me, that's like waiting. That's like waiting for crisis to figure out that you need to change. Some crises we can't change from, like a nuclear. We shouldn't have to have a nuclear holocaust, for example, to be able to change our ways. We need to be able to use our imaginations a little and say that this would absolutely, that's one of those mistakes. If we make that mistake, we're not going to make anything, to go against that quote. So it's cold right now, and I'm thinking about early humans making the mistake that reverberates. Some of their mistakes reverberate with us, some don't. This one definitely, I believe, does. They wandered too far north. Maybe it was a really warm season, but then they got trapped in a winter. Maybe this happened several times and lots of groups died, but the ones that survived did so because of shelter, modifications, but also clothing. So clothing I want to be thought of as a fungus. And obviously it's a good fungus in certain contexts. And I'm trying to link this to the idea. I can't think of the term for it, or if there even was a term, but if there was, that would, make me feel a lot better. But maybe it's better I don't know the term, so I have to define it instead of just throwing a term out there and forcing you to listen, you, the listener, to go figure it out. Basically, there's lots of chronic illnesses in today's very toxified society, where there's bacteria or fungus that we have along with us that you could blame as the cause, but they're really not a cause. You could say they're a symptom. But more than that, the fungus or bacteria are actually our body sort of brought in to help. So whatever negative parasitic things this thing is doing in our bodies, it's helping with some much larger problem. Like it's it eats away a lot of our calcium and our iron. I'm just making this up. But it's at the same time, it's allowing our blood from clotting in our veins. So it's keeping us alive. It's not our friend exactly, but it does have a mutual, in such a toxified body, it ends up being a mutual, it wants to keep us alive, so it could stay alive too. I think that's intrinsically there for the bacteria or the fungus. So getting rid of the fungus, say you could take a course of antibiotics or antifungals, might actually put you in a worse position because you're not understanding what the ecosystem within your body was doing. So anyways, I want to extrapolate that concept and apply it to clothing. Clothing is like a fungus we brought in for the cold context, but then it became normalized and spread back down to areas where clothing wasn't at all necessary, especially that kind of clothing. And then ideology grouped on and all these things piled on saying that, we need to not be naked, sex is bad. All these various things were suddenly grouped on top of just a simple action that was creative and useful for the time, but then lack of vigilance and lack of critical thinking about what you're doing in the world allowed clothing to proliferate. So it is like a bacteria, or it's like something that mars our development, because in the warmth of summer, when we need to get the sun, that maybe our ancestors were getting, even in a cold environment where the winter temperatures were obviously not hospitable, they were able to get the sun during the summer because they didn't have the cultural restrictions that we have that said you can't go around naked. So they were able to better survive the without the clothing. So basically, I guess to summarize what I'm trying to say is that clothing has been misappropriately used for a long time, and it's very normalized, it's very deeply entrenched in culture, and its opposite, which is nakedness, is very much taboo, faux pas, all these, whatever you want to call it. All those things really make it difficult. Because I honestly, I wear as little clothes as possible and sit and lay on the ground in the sun during the summer because I know how brutal these winters have been on my body. Um, they shake me to the core, and I'm not sure how far I am from death sometimes. It doesn't mean I don't rebound, but um, so that leads me into another misconceived uh, condition, which and what its purpose is and what its function is depression. Depression's identified, especially seasonal affective depression, which in a lot of ways I think the other depressions are very much linked to, even if it doesn't always come out that way. Um, so we have depression, and we think about it. We have it as a society. We have a lot of people with depression and milder forms. It slows you down, depression. It makes you not care about things or all these, things that maybe during, your higher moments, you're like, yeah, I could do these. Um, and it happens, it seems almost across the board and in the context of New Jersey, which is unfortunately where I am at the moment. I'm in the basket with all the eggs. I forget how I said it. Anyways, we're putting all those of us who decide we're going to defend New Jersey to the death might end up finding that ringing true because we're putting all our eggs in the basket with the most eggs in it already, as in most densely populated state. So I think it's just silly to be here, especially given the winters. If I have to be in a metropolis, I want to be in the Miami humid metropolis that supports life. I don't want to be in a desert. Phoenix is just a stupid idea. People who live there, I think, in drier climates they've just been conditioned to like dryness. There's such little vitality in a desert that the moisture doesn't even want to stay there. So if you want to think about it that way. But back to depression. Depression, I wouldn't say is like a disease that people suffer from. It's a prerequisite of living in the cold climate where the whole Earth, this part of the hemisphere, this far above the Tropic of Cancer, I think it's Cancer, but the same would apply the opposite season, the other side of the year. So this far north, depression is a prerequisite. Look at nature, like trees lose their leaves, they go dormant. Animals either fly south if they have the abilities, or they burrow a hole. They're not doing a whole lot. They're living depression, and they're doing what depression is telling them to do, which is to sleep longer, maybe get a little bit of light when it's available, but for the most part, just retire into a lower energy state, which is they're depressed, and their depression, they're living it, and they're better off for it, I think. We try to fight it because we're so busy trying to keep this civilizational game going that we end up using up any energy that we did have, and then we're worse off than any animal, even though we're in our little supposedly shelters while some animals are out there in the cold. We're burning through energy fighting the depression, which really puts us in an even worser depression where we do think about things like suicide because we're not that close to actual suicide in terms of degrees. It's like the quantity almost meets the quality. So, yeah, so those are my thoughts. I think, humans have gone astray in lots of ways, and we've, in a major fundamental way, we've allowed ourselves to stray because we're not vigilant, and we have decided to rely on symbolic language as opposed to relying on our innate imaginative capacities that could help us imagine our destruction. So it's really, and this might tie in, I've never read the book, but The Closing of the American Mind, which I think was written by a more conservative kind of guy. But basically the destruction, and I think this is the closing of the civilized mind. I think you could extrapolate it in a much larger way, that we've closed a huge part of our brain power and our imaginative capacities within our brain. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. We've closed these things down, and we've decided to rely lazily on accrued cultural knowledge, which is going to benefit culture, not necessarily people. And the culture is going to be able to proliferate that way because of our lack of vigilance, and poor cultural norms and ideas like patriarchy and all the big things that are oppressive are allowed to endure because we're not being vigilant. So anyways, this is a voice from the wilderness, maybe in a sense. I think it was Michael K. I forget who had that sort of phrase. But I feel like John Brown, I feel like an unhappy consciousness, and I'm not necessarily endorsing Hegelian philosophy when I say that. But I don't think there's necessarily happy unconscious people out there. I think people are miserable, they just don't know why. I feel like I've dug deep enough and I have enough of the picture that I know why we're absolutely not happy with our situation. And it's basic. We're domesticated animals. Many of us are environments that are not just oppressive as far as the civilizational aspects, but oppressive coldness. Cold becomes part of the infrastructure as it solidifies the land, the earth, the air, as it dries things out. And really allows vitality, very small space to be vital. So I don't know. I think I would like to migrate south, but I'm linked to a family here, and unfortunately, when these sorts of things come up, either they're called too abstract or just too radical, and thus another winter under our belt instead of a nice unseasonable warmth that really supports life. Just get me down to an underwater volcano, put some gills in me, and let me just hang out by that, because that's where life started, and that's the mimicking of life that we need now. We need to be where it's warm, where it supports our bodies, or else we're just going to keep being hit by more and more conditions as generations go on, and we have less goodness to pass on through the placenta, through the natural environment milieu in which babies find themselves. We're just going to get weaker. We're going to hit by more autoimmune diseases. We need to be warmer, first of all. I think we just feel a lot better. And we need to use our imaginations more to come to these discoveries. We don't need science to tell us everything. We have our beautiful fucking brain, which is a prerequisite to science to be able to even exist. We have our minds. They can do a lot. And we have to have food that feeds our brains, which is not going to be found in a monocropped grain field. But it is possible to get ourselves going in a better way. All right, I haven't been breathing very much. Another problem, modern problem. So I'm going to go do some deep breathing, but I'm not going to stop fighting. I'm not going to accept the present and be like a Buddhist monk about it. I think Buddhist monks in very different contexts might have something, but I think trying to radically accept, using the psychological, I think it's a dialectical behavior therapy term, indigestion. I can't radically accept this present. It's just way too stacked against humans, not just humans, but life on Earth. So those of you who are into Tai Chi, that's a good thing to do, but don't let it fucking make you forget what's at stake. We have around 7% extinction rate, and it's going to rise. You see those coral reefs being bleached. It is very, very, the most beautiful things die first. And a lot of beauty is dying. And that should scare the fucking shit out of us. And I don't feel bad about cursing, because in this context, political correctness is very much incorrect. It's very deadly, in fact. So while there's a lot of squawking about the hopes of representative democracy and electing a guy who can, sort of navigate, I'm referring to Bernie Sanders for some people, and then whatever's going on in Greece and in the European context, we can't fucking rely on the system, not any longer at all. You got to be political with everything, because everything's politicized against you. It's so politicized against you that you don't even see it as such, which shows the effectiveness of conditioning and propaganda. So things are really stacked against us, but there's a whole lot we can do when we realize it. I'm working my ass off, but I need some camaraderie to help me keep going. And hopefully I'm providing through my voice, which is the only way I can reach most of you. I can't hug you. I can't jump around and dance with you, which I think is what we're meant to do. All I can give you is my voice right now. And this coldness is just telling my body to cave in and just, take 5 months off. But other things are going on in the rest of the world that might be stacking things further against me next spring. I want to fight against those pesticide companies and those just, there's so much. So please just do what's local, and the most local thing you can do is thinking. The most local thing you can do literally is be in your head. Unless you're like me, I'm always in my head, so I need to be a little less in my head in certain ways. But be in your head. Your brain has, I don't want to say given to us. I don't want to give a religious thing, but that's sort of what makes the humans great and awful at the same time. So right now, I'd say most of our minds, most of the time, and this applies to me too, because I fall into mental thinking habits, we're in the awful state of our brains. Our brains have been catered to awfulness and continuing it, but they can be turned. So please start using your brain in that capacity. Thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry for the rambling. I just have a lot to say, and there's just so much to do. There's so much life to live that's not being lived. And, we might preclude ourselves from being able to live it if we stay on this path too much longer. All right. Love you all. And I mean that in a very true way. I love you all. And I want you to succeed in finding happiness. I don't think it's an impossibility. But don't trick yourself into thinking that happiness can be provided by a consumerized culture. I think that then we're just going to be overall more sad, more children being run over by cars, more cancer, more just lack of life. So, peace. Love you. Bye.